Formula One can often display some nerve-wracking and nail-biting championships.
Far enough back, he's going to make the lunge down the inside. Hamilton sees it.
Where the title holder is decided at the last race of the season. In this video, we're going to go through some of the most controversial last races in the history of the sport, where nothing was known until the leader of the race went through the checkered flag. 8th championship taken in the last seconds of the race, the Maiden champion lost in the final corner in Brazil, a man who's never led the championship until the last race going on to win it. These are the championships that have been decided in the last race of the season. Let's start with the 2007 season, where Raikkonen, Hamilton and Alonso have gone in a direct battle for the Drivers' Championship in Brazil. The season started extremely interesting, with these three drivers taking all places on the podium in the first two races in Australia and Malaysia, further suggesting that we're going to have a very competitive season ahead of us. But with Kimi's retirement in Barcelona and Germany, as well as finishes in 8th and 5th in Monaco and Canada, he opened the door for both Hamilton and Alonso. Now keep in mind that the McLaren pair were extremely competitive against each other. Let's not forget what Alonso did to Hamilton during the Hungarian GP in the pit lane on Saturday. He stalled on purpose so that his teammate wouldn't have time to put in a qualifying lap. And despite Hamilton winning the race and Alonso being P4 at that event, it was proof that nobody was willing to let go. But at the closing stages of the championship, Raikkonen was able to finish third in Japan, where Hamilton won the race and Alonso retired, and first in China, where Hamilton retired and Alonso finished second. This made for a very interesting battle in Brazil, where the leader of the championship was Hamilton with 107 points, Alonso was second with 103, and Raikkonen was third with 100 points. The grid could have been set up more dramatically for Sunday. FelipeMassa, Raikkonen's teammate, started on pole, while Hamilton was second, Raikkonen earned the third position, and Alonso was fourth. But at the start of the race was a disaster for Hamilton. He was overtaken by Raikkonen and Alonso and dropped to fourth. When he tried to gain the position back in turn 3, he dropped further back to 8th. On the 8th lap of the race, Hamilton lost gears temporarily and saw his race turn into a nightmare, falling to 18th place. Even though he got it working again, damage was done. And on the other side of the garage, Raikkonen was able to get the lead through the pit stop strategy of the Maranello-based squad. At the end, the Finn won the race, with Alonso finishing third and Hamilton finishing 7th. After Brazil, Raikkonen won the championship with 110 points, whereas Hamilton and Alonso were tied with 109 for second place. This season will also go down as one of the most controversial ones in McLaren's existence, as the Spygate scandal, in which they were accused of acquiring technical data from Ferrari, saw them being disqualified in the Constructors' Championship. I don't think anything topples the 2010 championship battle between Alonso, Webber, Vettel and Hamilton. The clear favourite for the championship ahead of the last race in Abu Dhabi was Alonso, who drove for Ferrari and had 246 points ahead of Webber, who had 238, Vettel with 231 and Hamilton with 222. Many expected the Spaniard to take the third championship in his career because all he had to do was finish in the top 4 and not care about the results of the others. But what if I told you that the driver who was third before Abu Dhabi went on to win the championship? In qualifying, Vettel took the pole position ahead of Hamilton, Alonso and Webber, with the second Red Bull driver starting P5 and already compromising his chances of winning the title. The start of the race was great for Vettel and Hamilton, and the first gamble was thrown by the Australian in Red Bull, who pitted early to try and undercut after being stuck behind slower cars. Ferrari saw this as a threat from Webber and pitted Alonso to prevent themselves from this undercut, not knowing that they have a very big chance of losing the title to Vettel as well. This was the crucial mistake of Ferrari, because it effectively put Alonso behind Vitaly Petrov in Renault, who had already pitted under the early safety car in lap 1. Vitaly had no intentions to back off, and he defended fiercely against Alonso. And the most painful part is that Vettel and Hamilton were able to stay out longer and rejoined ahead of the Petrov train. For more than 40 laps, Alonso was unable to complete a move against Petrov and ultimately saw his destiny being sealed by Vettel, the Red Bull driver that Ferrari didn't worry about at all. Sebastian never had the championship lead prior to this race, which makes his title even more interesting, as he went on to become the youngest F1 champion at the age of 23. At the end of Abu Dhabi, Vettel stood first with 256 points, Alonso was second with 252, and Webber had 242 in third position. It just goes to show you that you can never say never when Red Bull is in question. Vettel has gone on to win 3 championships after his maiden one, and Alonso was in close contention once more in 2012. What can I say? Hamilton had very competitive early days of his career, and nothing gets as close as his first championship in 2008. Headed into the last race of the season in Brazil, it was yet another showdown between a McLaren and Ferrari driver. This time it was FelipeMassa taking the reins from Raikkonen. The home hero had an amazing once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to win the championship on his home tarmac, as the championship standings were looking favourable towards Hamilton. The McLaren driver had 94 points and he had to finish in the top 5 in order to win the championship, whereas anything below a win for Massa, who had 87 points, would have been considered a loss. And the start of the race was everything that Massa could have hoped for. He clinched the pole position while Hamilton was a bit distant at P4. Just before the start, rain started, and everyone was on intermediates before they switched to dry tyres in the first 10 laps of the race. But in the final laps of the race, rain decided to mess up the order again, as everyone was forced to pit for intermediate tyres. Timo Glock from Toyota decided to gamble and to remain on dry tyres, moving to 4th, whereas Hamilton rejoined in 5th. Vettel, who drove for Toro Rosso back then, overtook Hamilton on a wet track and ultimately kicked him from the first place in the Drivers' Championship. It all seemed over. Massa crossed the line first and the Ferrari pit wall started to celebrate, a move that turned out to be fatal. In the last lap, in literally the last corners of the track, Timo Glock's bet on dry tyres had gone sour. He lost control of the car for a brief moment, enabling Hamilton to get past him. The Brit ended the race P5 and won the title by 1 point ahead of Massa. Of course, this season will go down as one of the most infamous ones because of a separate scandal that ruined Massa's chances of having a more stable lead in the last race. Crashgate. In Singapore, Renault decided to sabotage one of their own drivers so they could enable Alonso to win the race, something that was later admitted by the then FIA president Max Mosley. Now, if you're enjoying this trip down memory lane, make sure to drop a like, it really helps us a lot. This is one of the most intensive battles in the history of the sport, where in the final round of the championship, Schumacher, who drove for Ferrari, entered with a 1-point lead ahead of Jacques Villeneuve, who drove for Williams. It was a matter of whoever finished ahead in terms of the point scoring positions, but there was one catch. If both of them retired from the race, it meant that Michael Schumacher would walk home with his 3rd championship in F1. The race started exactly as you would imagine it. Villeneuve on pole, Schumacher 2nd. The front row was secured by the championship protagonists, and with Michael taking over the lead from the start, it sure looked like he would be crowned with the title. On the 48th lap, however, Villeneuve tried an overtaking manoeuvre, and Michael knew that he couldn't defend effectively at the dry sack hairpin. Therefore, he called a tactic that he used back in 1994 Adelaide as well, turning into Villeneuve's car and trying to force him off. However, this ended up being fatal for Michael. His car was beached in the gravel with no chances of returning, whereas Villeneuve went on to finish the race. By finishing 3rd, he sealed his first championship, and it only proved Schumacher that winning titles with his moves was quite impossible in that era. Due to this collision, the Ferrari driver was disqualified from the entire championship, effectively putting all of his effort in the trash can. We're talking about the most controversial end of a Formula 1 season that's known to mankind. The FIA decided to take matters into their own hands to enable a full 1-lap race between the two protagonists, Hamilton and Verstappen, who entered the last race in Abu Dhabi with an equal number of points, 369.5. Prior to this, we saw some intensive racing between these two, with some of the most prominent crashes happening in Silverstone,
Merest of touches, but it was enough, and look how the wheel has come.
And in Monza. In Silverstone, Verstappen was sent into the wall at the Copse corner with a force of 51 G after a direct collision with Hamilton. The Mercedes driver has gone on to win the race and waved the flag as if nothing happened, acting like his rival is not in the hospital with potential life-threatening injuries. In Monza, Verstappen decided to not leave space for Hamilton after a slow pit stop for the Mercedes driver and climbed his car on Hamilton's head. Thank God for the halo, otherwise this incident was going to end up horribly wrong. And fast forward to Abu Dhabi, we have these two starting on the front row, with Verstappen having the slight advantage from P1. But at the start of the race, Hamilton was able to take the lead and not give it up until the very closing stages of the finale. Not even Perez's heroics helped Verstappen in catching up to Hamilton, but an unusual aid came in the form of Nicholas Latifi, the then Williams driver. After crashing in a very difficult spot on the track, the safety car was called and Verstappen decided to use this to his own advantage by committing to a pit stop and putting on fresh soft tyres. Hamilton didn't use this opportunity, hoping that the race would end under the safety car conditions. But unfortunately for him and the entire Mercedes squad, Michael Masi, the race director, decided to stir things up a little bit. With only one lap left racing, he ordered the 5 lap cars between Hamilton and Verstappen to unlap themselves, while other lap cars were left right where they are. Masi restarted the race immediately, instead of waiting one more lap, which would have meant the race would end under safety car conditions, and the overtake of Verstappen happened almost immediately. Fast forward to 2025, and we're still aching that such a thrilling championship was decided by a human factor. I don't want to take away credit from Verstappen's Maiden championship, quite the contrary, but the fact that it was interfered with the way it was from Masi does take away some credit from it. The legendary battle between Hunt and Lauda during the 1976 season was crowned with a very questionable decision of the Ferrari driver on the last race in Japan. Ahead of this race, Lauda was leading Hunt by 3 points in the Drivers' Championship after miraculously surviving the incident in the Nürburgring. However, the weather conditions in Japan were very questionable, and Lauda was calling for the race to be delayed. Despite safety fears, the race went on, and Lauda started third while Hunt was on pole. Then, something extraordinary happened. Lauda decided that the risk wasn't worth it, and he withdrew from the race just after 2 laps. It meant an open door for James Hunt, who dropped to 5th after a puncture and an unscheduled pit stop. But in the final laps of the race, tension grew. James Hunt finished 3rd behind Mario Andretti, who won the race, and Patrick Depailler from Tyrrell. It was enough to win the championship by 1 point only, as the moves of Lauda have labelled a heroic and rather disciplinary approach to the sport. From Schumacher's clash to Hamilton's heartbreak, F1 always delivers drama. Now, if you want more nerve-wracking moments like these, subscribe and hit the bell because we're just getting started.